Welcome to Map Crow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we are talking about comics, because I just can't stand it any longer. In light of the advertisement blitz for the Marvel Cinematic Universe's new movie, The Eternals, there has been some discourse that I feel I must use my platform to respond to. The comic book series upon which this movie is based was started by Jack Kirby, who is one of my favorite artists in any medium. A direct visual comparison to the comics that Jack drew and the images that are coming out of these, trailers and movie stills and everything. Well, it just doesn't seem that public opinion is swinging in the favor of my favorite artists. So let's talk about that. Let's unpack this a little bit, and let's do something pretty daring and rare these days, and really actually take some time to look at art. The first thing I want you to think about when looking at the work of Jack Kirby is to recognize that however the final form is presented to you, Jack Kirby was a black and white artist. He worked in pencils. And yes, he was communicating sometimes with the rest of the team on what the colors for all the characters should be, but for the most part, the part that Jack Kirby actually had the most control over was the pencils that went on the Bristol board that he handed over to the inker. This double-page spread that we're looking at today is from 1977, from issue 10 of the first run of the Eternals, which was written and penciled by Jack Kirby and inked and lettered by Mike Royer. I think it's very important when talking about art to use the artists' names, even if it's work-for-hire stuff that, Disney owns now. Let's not talk about things exclusively as Marvel projects or Disney properties, or these were made by people, individuals with creative goals and bills to pay. Let's try to keep that in mind, please. When looking at the inks for this page, I feel like it really comes to life in a way that the 70s coloring technology for comic books just really doesn't capture. The best way to read a Jack Kirby comic book is whatever way you can, but in my opinion, you're really missing out if you're not looking at the inks. In the creative pipeline of comic books, inkers had a tremendous impact on your access to the intent of the penciler, and in this case, Jack Kirby being interpreted and embellished upon by Mike Royer really makes a big difference on your experience with the art. Now, Jack Kirby has a very heavy style, and the way that he handles figure is, Jack dropped out of art school and basically taught himself how to do all of this, and that is why his anatomy is a bit improvisational. If you come into any art encounter with preconceived ideas about what is acceptable anatomy, or if you insist that the highest calling of any artist is to make things as pretty and realistic as possible, well, you're really missing out on a lot of art, not just Jack, but some of the best artists who have ever lived. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you are welcome to have whatever tastes you want, but coming at art with your own goals is sort of a dishonest enterprise. The best way to approach art is humbly and to see what the artist has in mind for you. If an artwork does not seem interested in accurate anatomy, find out what perhaps its goals are. What does it emphasize in lieu of a descriptive anatomy? On this particular page, I feel like Jack is really putting an emphasis on scale and depth, and to do that, he needs to foreshorten and overlap and really compress space in the composition. If we zoom in on this tiny little corner, how many figures can you see in this part of the composition? Not counting the ineffable space god in the background, I count 8 people. And they're all scrambling around in a blind panic, trying in vain to defend themselves from this cosmic might that has come down upon them. All of their turrets and gizmos are crumbling and crashing down around them. The few weapons that they still have intact are completely worthless as their shells shatter against the shoulder of this mighty celestial. Dead bodies ragdoll around the ruins as people flee in anguish and despair. It's pandemonium, and let's contrast that with the uncaring, unblinking, unhuman face of a wrathful god. Hey, next time you read a comic book, just do a little experiment. Time how long it takes you to read a single issue, and then count how many panels are in that issue, and see how long you spend on each panel. 1 second? 2 seconds? Probably most of that time you're reading text. You're probably not spending very much time looking at a panel without any words on it at all. Comics are unique that they tell a story in sequence, and yet the medium is static. You can take as long as you want with each of those panels, and it doesn't have the same effect as, say, slow motion does on a movie. It doesn't drag out the pace of the story, it just deepens your experience with it. And I'll be honest, I really don't even like this comic. I think the Eternals is minor Kirby. Like, this isn't even at the height of his powers. But the affect, the graphic impact of this work is something that, like, movies just can't compete with because it's just scene after scene after scene. They don't expect you to have an attention span in the same way that a comic by Jack Kirby really honors. So, if this is minor Kirby, what's the best Kirby page? Well, let me show you. This is a double-page spread from a project called Street Code. It was a semi-autobiographical comic about Jack Kirby's childhood on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The project never really came to fruition and was only published after he died with pencils only. There are smudges all over the place. His eyesight was failing at this point in his life, and the linear perspective, figure drawing, and facial features are grotesque. It's not really a good drawing, but I'll tell you this, it's the best thing he ever drew. It's better than anything I'll ever draw. It's incredible. 3 men slug it out on a stoop, next to a wino who looks at the last splash of wine in the bottle. A bulldog cop walking out of the dentist yells at someone for dumping their garbage on the street. A boy throws a stolen piece of fruit at his friend and doesn't know he's about to be run over by an ice cart. The claustrophobia of the fire escapes and drying laundry choke out all opportunity and creativity from a young Jack Kirby who barely escaped this neighborhood with his life. When Jack moved out, he never went back. He never saw this neighborhood again. He went to the war, and he moved eventually to LA. And these memories are 60, 70 years old when he's drawing them here. They clearly haunted him for the rest of his life. That window into someone's memories, that subjectivity that's being shared so powerfully through an unfinished piece of art, is what makes Jack Kirby so great. He was incapable of, if anything, not being himself, not sharing his point of view. He refused to just be another pair of hands on the assembly line of Marvel Comics. He always shared himself and his values and his memories, the things that made him scared, the things that brought him joy. That's art. That's what it's all about. That's why it continues to inspire artists and movies and franchises and all this stuff. It's because it's good. Because it's great. I had a load of notes for this video going into it to talk about like Gestalt storytelling principles and, all these fancy terms like synoptic narrative and all this kind of stuff. But really, just an honest couple of minutes looking at this art is going to do so much better than any academic muckety muck like me yammering about it. So please do yourself a favor. Go get some comics and read them slowly. Thanks for watching.